Listen carefully. This message is not for everyone. This message is only for the ones who have been isolated, misunderstood, and quietly removed from circles they once belonged to, the ones who noticed the invitations stopped, the messages slowed, and the familiar faces turned distant without explanation. If you've been feeling lonely, not socially lonely, but existentially alone, as if no one can truly reach you anymore, as if conversations skim the surface while your soul stands somewhere far deeper, understand this clearly. This is not abandonment. This is containment. Some of you were removed not because you were weak, not because you failed, but because you were too powerful to remain unguarded, too potent to stay exposed, too consequential to be accessible to everyone. The karmic couple, the practitioner behind the scenes, and the ones who thought they were working on you, manipulating, siphoning, and orchestrating pressure from the shadows, they just learned something the hard way. You were never the victim in their ritual. You were the end point. You were never the target. You were the judgment. You were never sent to be destroyed. You were sent to end cycles. And understand this precisely. You are not a death angel in the sense of harm or violence. You are a death angel to false timelines, to expired karmic contracts, to energetic parasites, and to stolen destinies that were never meant to continue. You end what is artificial simply by existing in truth. And when they touched you, when they crossed energetic boundaries they did not understand, their world collapsed, not because you attacked, but because truth destabilizes illusion on contact. Before we go any further, if you feel this message vibrating in your chest, if something inside you recognizes itself in these words, comment, "I am chosen." Like this video to anchor the message and subscribe, because these messages are confirmations, not coincidences. Take a breath. Now let's dive deeper. Why you feel lonely, and why it's not what you think. Chosen one, your loneliness is not social, it is dimensional. You feel alone because your frequency no longer matches most environments. You can sit in a room full of people and still feel untouched. You can speak clearly and feel unheard. You can offer love and feel unmatched. This is not rejection. This is filtration. God does not isolate the chosen to punish them. God isolates the chosen to protect what is forming. Just like gold is separated from debris, just like a seed is buried before it breaks open, you were removed because your next form cannot be witnessed by unclean eyes or interfered with by unready hands. Loneliness is not your enemy. Loneliness is the soundproof chamber where your authority matures, where your nervous system recalibrates, where your discernment sharpens, and where your presence becomes undeniable. What feels like emptiness is actually containment, and what feels like silence is preparation for a voice that will no longer be ignored. Point 1. Why the loneliness began without warning. The loneliness did not arrive gradually. It arrived suddenly, almost violently, as if something in your life was switched off without explanation, like a door closing without a sound but echoing through every part of your inner world. One day you still belonged to familiar spaces, familiar conversations, and familiar emotional rhythms, and the next day those same spaces felt distant, hollow, and inaccessible, as though you were observing your own life from behind glass. This is not because you became difficult, cold, or disconnected. It is because your frequency shifted faster than your environment could follow. When a chosen one begins to step out of survival mode and into awareness, the nervous system recalibrates at a level most people never experience. Your body stops mistaking chaos for connection. Your spirit stops confusing familiarity with safety. Old bonds that were formed through trauma, dependency, obligation, or shared confusion can no longer attach because they were never rooted in truth to begin with. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was the absence of noise you were never meant to carry long term. God often removes sound before delivering instruction because clarity cannot land in a crowded mind. What you interpreted as loneliness was actually the first sign that your inner world had become incompatible with manipulation, emotional feeding, and energetic leakage. People who once had constant access to you suddenly felt uncomfortable around your presence. Not because you spoke more, but because you needed less. Your calm disrupted systems built on control. Your stillness exposed agendas that thrived on reaction. This phase is not punishment. It is protection, disguised as isolation. It is the spiritual quarantine that prevents contamination, while your discernment sharpens. In this season, your intuition becomes louder precisely because external voices grow quiet. You begin to notice how often you used to abandon yourself to maintain connection. You begin to see how much of your empathy was being exploited. Loneliness in this context is not a lack of love, it is the refinement of it. God is separating you from patterns that would dilute your calling, from relationships that would delay your assignment, and from environments that would demand you stay small to remain accepted. This is the threshold moment where comfort is removed so alignment can take its place. You are not alone. You are being repositioned. The quiet is not rejection. It is preparation. Point 2. Why isolation is not rejection, but containment. Most people think isolation means being cast aside, forgotten, or rejected, but in spiritual reality, isolation is rarely abandonment. It is placement. It is being moved deliberately into a space where interference is minimized and alignment can stabilize. When something carries power before its time, it is not displayed. It is stored, sealed, and protected until the moment it can be handled correctly. That is what happened to you. Your spirit reached a frequency where it began to emit a stabilizing force, and stability is deeply threatening to those who survive on chaos. Destabilized people cannot coexist peacefully around someone whose presence exposes imbalance. This is why conflicts seem to appear without warning, why harmless conversations turned tense, why misunderstandings escalated far beyond logic, and why people began projecting stories onto you that had nothing to do with who you truly are. Your stillness disrupted their inner noise, and instead of self-reflection, they chose reaction. Isolation was not imposed because you were wrong. It emerged because your energy no longer fit environments built on disorder. This phase is not about punishment, exile, or loss. It is about containment. Containment is what happens when something valuable can no longer be handled casually. Your access was restricted because your presence carries consequence. Not everyone is meant to touch what God is preparing. When elevation is coming, reach is reduced. When clarity is forming, noise is removed. When refinement is underway, crowds disappear. God limits who can reach you, not to deprive you of connection, but to protect the process unfolding within you. Isolation strips away external influence so your spirit can recalibrate without distortion. It teaches discernment by removing distraction. It reveals who was feeding on your energy rather than honoring it. In this quiet, your intuition sharpens, your identity solidifies, and your dependency on external validation dissolves. What feels like being set aside is actually being set apart. You were not hidden because you were weak. You were hidden because you were becoming precise. This season is a spiritual buffering period, a sacred pause before repositioning. When the time comes, you will re-enter the world with fewer attachments, clearer vision, and stronger boundaries. Until then, solitude is not emptiness. It is divine protection actively at work. Point 3. The karmic couple and the misinterpretation of your nature. The karmic couple did not see you clearly, not because you hid yourself, but because they lacked the depth to perceive what stood before them. They sensed something ancient in you, something steady and unmoved, yet they interpreted that depth as passivity. They felt your stillness and mistook it for weakness, because in their world, power is loud, reactive, and constantly performing. This is a common error made by those who have never encountered quiet authority. Your calm was never submission. It was restraint forged through awareness. You had already mastered what they were still fighting. When they attempted to entangle you energetically, emotionally, or spiritually, they believed they were pulling you into familiar patterns of control, projection, and manipulation. What they did not realize was that they were activating a feedback loop they did not understand. Chosen ones do not absorb corruption. They reflect truth, and truth is unbearable to those living inside carefully constructed illusions. Your presence did not attack them, accuse them, or chase them. It simply remained authentic, and authenticity destabilizes false identities. What they experienced as sudden loss, confusion, emotional collapse, or karmic reversal was not punishment delivered by you. It was exposure to themselves. Every unresolved wound, every hidden intention, every unconscious pattern they refused to face was mirrored back the moment they tried to dominate what they could not control. You became the surface upon which their shadow revealed itself. This is why their reaction felt disproportionate, chaotic, and extreme. They were not responding to you as a person. They were responding to the death of the story they told themselves. You were not sent to harm them, embarrass them, or destroy their life. You were sent as a boundary encoded in human form. You were sent to end a cycle they had been repeating unconsciously, one built on exploitation, dependency, and false power. Your role was not to engage, but to remain aligned. In doing so, you interrupted generational patterns, karmic contracts, and energetic loops that had gone unchallenged for years. This is why your silence carried more weight than their words, why your absence created more impact than their presence, and why their unraveling began only after encountering you. You did not curse them. You completed the lesson. You did not take anything from them. You simply refused to carry what was never yours, and in that refusal, the illusion collapsed on its own. Point 4. Why attacks always precede your breakthroughs. Every time you approach a new level of awareness, resistance appears, not because the path is wrong, but precisely because it is correct. Because truth creates pressure in systems built on avoidance, and growth disturbs what has grown comfortable in stagnation. Resistance is friction, and friction is proof of motion. It is the sound of old structures straining as you move beyond them. Chosen. One often misunderstands this phase and assumes something has gone wrong, when in reality, something has finally gone right. Your awareness is expanding, your frequency is sharpening, and the environment responds the only way it knows how, by testing whether you are anchored or still seeking validation. You trigger subconscious reckoning in others, not through arrogance or confrontation, but through alignment. Your presence mirrors back what people have buried, postponed, or denied. You do not need to say much, you do not need to explain yourself. Simply existing honestly unsettles those who survive by performance, masks, and self-betrayal. This is why resistance often arrives disguised as misunderstandings, sudden coldness, gossip, spiritual interference, subtle hostility, or an unexplainable energetic pressure that seems to surround you when you step into certain spaces. These are not coincidences. They are symptoms of internal conflict projected outward. People sense that you cannot be easily controlled, manipulated, or absorbed into their narratives, and this threatens unconscious power dynamics. But these moments are not meant to break you. They are meant to teach you discernment. Discernment is not paranoia. It is clarity without emotional attachment. Each wave of resistance refines your nervous system, teaching you how to remain grounded while chaos unfolds around you, how to stay centered without becoming hardened, and how to observe without absorbing. You learn when to speak and when silence protects your energy more effectively than explanation ever could. You learn that not every misunderstanding needs correction, and not every attack deserves engagement. Resistance trains you to recognize alignment versus access and connection versus intrusion. Over time, what once felt heavy becomes neutral, then instructive, then almost invisible. You stop reacting and start responding with stillness. This is the quiet mastery of the chosen one path, the ability to walk through distorted environments without distortion entering you. The resistance fades, not because you defeated it, but because you outgrew the frequency it needed to exist. Point 5. Why you were never meant to be fully understood. The need to be understood is a human desire, but not a divine requirement. Chosen ones are not designed for universal comprehension. If everyone could understand you, they could predict you. If they could predict you, they could influence you. Your solitude preserves your unpredictability. This is why surface-level conversations feel draining and repetitive. Your spirit requires depth, silence, or truth. Anything else feels like dilution. You are not antisocial. You are selective by design. Point 6. The psychological shift you are experiencing now. Recently, something has changed, and even if you cannot fully explain it yet, you can feel it in your body and in the way your mind responds to the world around you. You may notice that you are less reactive, less emotionally hooked, less compelled to explain yourself or defend your position. Situations that once demanded an immediate emotional response now pass through you with surprising quiet. This is not emotional shutdown, and it is not numbness. It is regulation. It is the nervous system returning to balance after a long period of survival mode. You are no longer operating from defense, where every interaction feels like a threat and every misunderstanding feels personal. You are operating from awareness. And when awareness stabilizes, chaos loses access to you. Chaos depends on reaction. It feeds on urgency, confusion, guilt, and emotional overexertion. Without those entry points, it has nowhere to attach. This is why old triggers suddenly stop working. The same words, behaviors, or manipulative tactics that once unsettled you now feel distant, almost irrelevant, as if they belong to a story you no longer live inside. You can see the pattern without being pulled into it. You can recognize the hook without biting. This is the moment when many karmic connections realize they have lost influence, because karmic bonds are sustained through emotional charge. They survive on unresolved wounds, unspoken expectations, and the need for validation. When you no longer supply that energy, the bond weakens, not through conflict, not through confrontation, but through neutrality. Your calm becomes disruptive to dynamics that relied on your instability. Your silence speaks louder than explanations ever did. You may notice people becoming confused by your composure, testing old buttons that no longer respond, or escalating behavior in subtle ways to see if they can still reach you. This is not because you have done something wrong, but because your frequency has changed. You're no longer available for unconscious agreements. You're no longer negotiating your peace. Awareness has replaced reaction, and presence has replaced performance. This phase often feels quiet, even lonely at times, because so much of your past interaction was built around managing emotional turbulence. Now there is space, and in that space, clarity begins to form. You start choosing responses instead of default reactions. You conserve energy instead of leaking it. You observe without absorbing. This is the threshold where self-mastery begins to solidify. The world may look the same, but your access point to it has shifted. And once that shift occurs, there is no going back to who you were when chaos had permission to enter. Point 7. Why this season will end with alignment, not isolation. Isolation is never the destination. It is the corridor you were guided through when your spirit needed refinement. You were not meant to remain alone forever, and you are not broken for needing distance. You were meant to return calibrated, steady, and clear. The separation was not punishment, it was precision. In the quiet, your discernment sharpened, your nervous system softened, and your soul learned the difference between intensity and truth. The next people in your life will not feel chaotic, consuming, or emotionally draining. They will feel grounded, familiar, safe. Recognition will replace explanation because they will see you without effort. Peace will replace longing because you will no longer chase connection. You will meet it naturally. Your loneliness was the sacred space required for maturity to complete its work. You were not abandoned, you were protected from what could not sustain your elevation. What could not rise with you had to fall away, and what remains ahead will meet you exactly where you truly are, not who you once were.